I watched the guy beside me roll his eyes at his girlfriend, saying, "I want to break up." I couldn't believe he'd break up with her in a cafe full of people. The girl looked at him, fighting back tears. "Why? I did everything you asked me to," she asked, trembling. "That's the problem," he sighed. "You're too much of a good girl. No guy would ever be interested in that." That's when she wrapped her arm around mine and pulled me towards her. "Well, you're wrong. My new boyfriend likes me this way," she lied, glancing at me nervously with a pleading expression. I knew exactly where this was going, and to humiliate a bad guy? Why not? I smiled and got up, twirling her around into my arms. "It's time for you to go, buddy," I told him. The guy's face went red, looking back to call her lame just before he walked out. We both stood there in silence for a moment. "Well, I'm glad that worked out for you," I smiled, closing my laptop to leave. The girl, Marinette, shook her head and yelled, "Wait! 2 weeks, please play along. I want him to get jealous. I'll even pay you." She rummaged through her bag and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. I laughed and agreed. It was just 2 weeks, right? Marinette and I exchanged numbers, and in the morning, she sent me a detailed game plan on how to make her ex come crawling back. We needed to be seen together at all the places her ex loved. Gym, bar, even the coffee shop where he'd broken up with her. "And we have to make it believable," she reminded me. That was easy for me. But for her? She struggled through our first official fake date, awkwardly spouting romantic lines out loud from the Akotar books that she loved so much. "Every piece of my heart belongs to you," she quoted loudly, hoping her ex would hear. I burst out laughing. "That's cute and all, but that's not going to make him jealous," I told her, before sliding my arms over her shoulders and pulling her close. "First thing you gotta do is post romantic pics together. Put a cute caption like New Beginnings." Her face lit up at my idea. She pulled out her phone and officially soft-launched our relationship. Sure enough, her ex commented with angry emojis. Marinette grinned, pointing her phone towards me. "Look, it's working!" she squealed excitedly. The next few dates went by more smoothly. She dropped the forced book lines and started talking to me like an actual date. But by the second week, something changed. Marinette started texting me outside of our scheduled meetups. She started calling me late into the night, chatting about random memes. She showed up to places where her ex never would have gone, just because she thought I'd like it. And honestly, I started getting scared and protective. I started thinking, what if we just continued dating like this forever? And I wasn't the only one who felt that way. A few days ago, Marinette invited me to the park and said something that made my heart race and chest tighten at the same time. I stopped thinking about my ex and started thinking about you. I was just a boring good girl that no one wanted, but you made me feel like I was someone special, she said, her ears turning bright pink. I wanted to tell her so badly that I felt the same way, but just before I could, her ex-boyfriend walked over with flowers. "Marinette, I was wrong. About everything," he said, launching into a speech about how he finally saw her clearly and wanted another chance. Marinette opened her mouth to speak, but I couldn't bear it. I pulled her to the side and looked her straight in the eyes. "Marinette, this entire thing between us was meant to be just pretend, but it stopped feeling that way for me since our first date. Please," I begged her, "don't say yes to him." She looked at me like I'd physically hurt her. I wanted him so badly. This entire thing, our dates, it was all just to get him back and make him jealous. But now I don't know. Marinette stood between us with tears streaming down her face. She looked at me and saw 2 weeks of real connection. She looked at him and remembered just how desperate she felt trying to win him back. "Please, Marinette, I love you," his ex announced in a soft voice that twisted my stomach into knots. I pressed my lips together and made the decision for her. I patted her shoulder, placed a kiss on her cheek, and walked off. "Wait," she called out with a determined look on her face. I turned around and my feet felt like they'd stuck to the grass. She stood there with her hands pressed together in front of her chest, and her ex shifted his weight from one foot to the other while holding those stupid flowers. The sun hit my eyes at a weird angle, and I had to squint to see her face clearly. She took this big breath that made her shoulders rise and fall, and I could see her trying to figure out what words to say next. Her ex made this annoyed sound in his throat and tightened his grip on the flower stems until I thought they might snap. I stood there frozen, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my ears, waiting for her to pick one of us, or maybe tell us both to leave. The afternoon felt too warm and too bright, and everything seemed to be moving in that slow way where you notice every single detail. She opened her mouth and then closed it again, looking between me and him like she was trying to solve some impossible math problem. Her hands were shaking a little bit, and I wanted to walk back over and take them in mine, but I stayed put, because this had to be her choice. The park around us kept going like normal with people walking their dogs and kids playing on the swings. But our little triangle felt like it existed in its own separate world. She finally spoke, and her voice came out stronger than I expected, telling her ex that he needed to go for now because she had to talk to me first. His face went red, and he started to argue, saying something about how he'd been waiting and he deserved an answer right away. She cut him off with this firm tone I'd never heard her use before, repeating that he needed to leave and she'd contact him when she was ready. He looked at me like he wanted to start something, but then he just sighed really loud and set the flowers down on the nearest bench with more force than necessary. He walked toward the parking lot, and I watched his back get smaller, and he turned around twice to look at us before he finally disappeared behind some trees. Marinette and I stood there in this awkward silence for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. Neither of us seemed to know how to start the conversation we needed to have. She wrapped her arms around herself, even though it wasn't cold, and I shoved my hands in my pockets because I didn't know what else to do with them. We walked over to a different bench on the other side of the path, away from where her ex had left those flowers sitting like some kind of sad memorial. She sat down first, and I left a bit of space between us, not sure if she wanted me close or far away right now. She stared at her shoes for a minute, and then looked up at me with this tired expression that made my chest hurt. She told me she needed time before she could give anyone an answer about anything, and the words came out rushed, like she'd been practicing them in her head. I nodded fast and said that was completely fair, that she should take whatever time she needed. She twisted her hands together in her lap and said she wanted to talk honestly about what was actually real between us before she made any decisions about him. Relief washed through my whole body, because at least she wasn't running back to him immediately. At least she was considering that we might be something worth thinking about. The bench felt hard under me, and I could hear traffic from the street nearby mixing with bird sounds from the trees. She asked me if I really meant what I said about my feelings not being pretend anymore, and I told her yes, without hesitating, that somewhere around our third or fourth meetup, everything shifted for me. She nodded slowly and admitted the same thing happened to her, that she'd started looking forward to my texts more than checking if her ex noticed her posts. We sat there comparing notes on when the fake started feeling real, and it turned out we'd both been catching feelings at almost the exact same time without telling each other. After maybe 20 minutes of talking, Marinette said she needed to go tell her ex in person that she wasn't ready to answer him yet. I offered to walk with her to where he was probably waiting by his car, and she grabbed my hand and squeezed it once before letting go. We crossed the park together, and I could see him leaning against his driver's side door, scrolling through his phone with this impatient look on his face. When he saw us coming, he stood up straight, and his expression changed to hopeful, like he thought she was coming to say yes. Marinette walked right up to him, and I hung back a few feet to give them space, but stayed close enough that he knew I wasn't going anywhere. She told him clearly and calmly that she needed space to think, and he should go home, that she'd contact him when she was ready to talk. He immediately started arguing, saying he'd already waited long enough, and she owed him a real conversation after everything they'd been through together. She didn't back down, though, just repeated that she needed space, and she wasn't going to discuss it further right now. He looked at me with this angry expression, and I could tell he wanted to blame me for everything, but Marinette stepped between us and told him again that he needed to leave. He finally threw his hands up and got in his car, slamming the door harder than necessary. We watched him drive off, and I noticed his tires squealed a little when he pulled out of the parking spot. The boundary she just set with him felt like a small victory, even though nothing was actually resolved yet, and I felt proud of her for standing her ground. We ended up driving across town to this quieter cafe neither of us had been to before, somewhere far away from all our usual spots where people might recognize us. The place was almost empty, except for one old guy reading a newspaper in the corner and a college student with headphones doing homework. We ordered coffee and sat at a table by the window, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt like we could just breathe without worrying about who might see us or what we should be performing. Over our coffee, we both started admitting things we'd been holding back, like how the fake dating stopped feeling fake somewhere around our third or fourth meetup. She told me she started looking forward to my texts more than checking if her ex had noticed her posts, and that shift happened without her even realizing it at first. I confessed that I kept suggesting extra hangouts that had nothing to do with making him jealous, just because I wanted to spend more time with her. We laughed about how obvious it probably was to everyone except us that we were actually falling for each other while pretending to date. The coffee tasted better than usual, or maybe I was just paying more attention to normal things because I wasn't busy planning our next strategic move. She stirred sugar into her cup and told me about this moment during our 5th fake date when she'd caught herself thinking about what it would be like if we just kept doing this forever. I admitted I'd had the exact same thought that same night while driving home, wondering if we could just skip the part where the arrangement ended and move straight into something real. Marinette pulled out her phone and opened Instagram, and I watched her finger hover over the delete button on our first soft launch post. She looked at me like she was asking permission, and I nodded, so she started deleting them one by one right there at the table. She said she didn't want our relationship, whatever it ended up becoming, to be about performing for anyone or proving anything to her ex. I felt this weight lift off my shoulders as those staged images disappeared from her profile, all those carefully posed pictures that were supposed to make someone jealous. We agreed together that there would be no more strategic posts or planned run-ins at places her ex liked to go, that if we were going to try this for real, it had to be just about us. She deleted the last photo and set her phone face down on the table like she was closing a chapter, and I reached across and took her hand because it felt like the right moment for a real gesture instead of a performed one. The cafe owner came by to refill our coffee, and we both jumped a little, realizing we'd been holding hands across the table without thinking about it. After he left, we talked about what trying this for real would actually look like, and she suggested we give it 1 week of actual dating with no labels or pressure. She said we should treat it like starting completely fresh, as if the fake dating arrangement had never happened at all. I agreed out loud, but privately, I worried that 2 weeks of pretending might have tangled everything up too much to ever untangle cleanly. The coffee had gone lukewarm by the time we finished talking through all the details, but neither of us seemed to care. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the ceiling, and my brain wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking about whether I was just a rebound for her, or maybe a rebellion against what her ex said about her being too much of a good girl. The timing felt really messy and complicated, like we were building something on shaky ground that might collapse any second. I was scared she might be confusing gratitude for actual attraction, that maybe she just appreciated me helping her make her ex jealous, and her brain had twisted that into romantic feelings. I wanted this to be real so badly it hurt, but I also didn't want to be the guy she settled for just to prove her ex wrong about her. My roommate knocked on my door to ask if I wanted to order pizza, and I pretended I was already asleep because I couldn't handle normal conversation right now. I lay there in the dark, thinking about every moment from the past 2 weeks, trying to figure out which parts were real and which parts were performance. The problem was, they'd all started to blur together until I couldn't tell the difference anymore. I wondered if she was lying in her bed across town having the same thoughts, or if she was already sure about what she wanted. My phone sat on my nightstand, and I kept checking it even though she hadn't texted, hoping for some sign that would tell me everything was going to work out. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Marinette, and my heart jumped before I even read what it said. She'd sent me a screenshot showing a message she'd sent to her ex, telling him she needed a full week of no contact to think clearly about everything. His read receipt showed up at the bottom, but he hadn't responded, and she added that it was probably killing him not to argue back immediately. She sounded really proud of herself for setting that boundary, even though she admitted her hands were shaking when she hit send. I wrote back telling her I was proud of her too, that taking space for herself was a big deal. She sent back a bunch of relieved emojis and said she felt like she could finally breathe without constantly checking her phone to see if he'd reacted to something. We texted back and forth for a while about random stuff, and it felt easy and normal in a way our conversations hadn't felt when we were busy planning our next fake date move. She told me about this pottery class she'd been wanting to try, I told her about this new coffee shop near campus that supposedly had the best breakfast sandwiches in town. Neither of us mentioned her ex or the big decision she still had to make. We just talked about normal everyday things, like two people getting to know each other. By the time I had to leave for class, I was smiling at my phone like an idiot, and my roommate made fun of me, but I didn't even care. Our first real date happened 2 days later, and we decided to keep it completely ordinary on purpose. We met up at the grocery store because we both needed to buy stuff anyway, and we walked through the aisles together comparing our terrible cooking skills. She grabbed a box of pasta, and I grabbed a jar of sauce, and we joked about how that was basically the extent of our combined cooking knowledge. There was no pressure to look couple perfect or post about it, nobody watching us or judging whether we seemed believable together. We just existed as two regular people buying groceries and making each other laugh about stupid stuff. After the store, we took a long walk through this neighborhood neither of us usually visited, looking at the old houses and making up stories about the people who might live in them. The conversation flowed naturally about random things like our worst cooking disasters and embarrassing childhood stories. She told me about the time she accidentally set off the fire alarm making toast, and I told her about when I tried to impress a date by cooking dinner and gave us both food poisoning. We laughed until our sides hurt, and I realized this felt more comfortable than any of our staged dates ever had. even the ones that were supposed to look natural. There was something about not performing that made everything easier, like we could just be ourselves without worrying about hitting the right notes. By the time we got back to where we'd parked, 3 hours had passed without either of us noticing. She hugged me goodbye, and it lasted a few seconds longer than a casual hug, and when she pulled away, she was smiling in this way that made me think maybe we were going to be okay. That feeling lasted exactly 2 more days before reality crashed back in. By day 3, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from people I barely talked to, asking what was going on with me and Marinette. Someone from our chemistry class wanted to know if we were official, or if this was still about making her ex jealous. A guy from the gym asked if I was serious about her or just messing around. 3 different mutual friends sent nearly identical texts, asking if we broke up, because they noticed we stopped posting photos together. The questions felt like people watching us through a window, and I realized our fake relationship had turned into campus entertainment that everyone felt entitled to comment on. I texted Marinette asking if she was getting the same treatment, and she sent back a screenshot of her own messages, showing basically the same invasive questions. She wrote that it was overwhelming, and she didn't know how to respond to anyone without either lying or explaining the whole complicated situation. We decided to meet up that afternoon at the quiet cafe to figure out what to do about the attention. Marinette pulled out her phone and opened Instagram, showing me all the photos from our fake dating phase still sitting on her profile. The captions about new beginnings and the staged couple poses looked weird now that we were actually trying to date for real. She suggested we archive them all to make them invisible without fully deleting the evidence that they existed. I agreed immediately, because keeping those photos up felt like we were still performing for an audience instead of just being together. We sat there side by side going through each post and hitting archive, watching our fake relationship disappear from public view, one image at a time. It felt strange to erase all that evidence of the past few weeks, but also freeing to reduce how much people could watch and judge us. Some friends would probably think we broke up when they noticed the photos gone, but we agreed that was better than constantly having to explain ourselves to everyone. Marinette deleted the soft launch post last and said it felt like closing a chapter that needed to be closed. That evening, I was at Marinette's apartment waiting for her to finish getting ready when Gita pulled her into the kitchen for a private conversation. I could hear most of what Gita was saying through the thin walls, and she was warning Marinette about rebound relationships and how I might be too good to be true. Gita's voice was serious, asking if Marinette had really thought this through, or if she was just jumping from one relationship straight into another without processing anything. Marinette got defensive at first, saying she knew what she was doing, and this was different from what she had with her ex. But later, after Gita left for her own plans, Marinette admitted to me that Gita had raised some valid concerns she'd been trying to ignore. We ended up canceling our original plans and just sitting on her couch having a long, honest conversation about timing and whether we were both actually ready for something real. I told her I understood if she needed more space to figure things out, and I didn't want to rush into anything that might fall apart later. She said she appreciated that, but also didn't want to waste what felt like a real connection just because the timing wasn't perfect. We talked in circles for over an hour, trying to figure out if we were making a good decision or a reckless one. I decided to share something I'd been keeping to myself about a relationship I had 2 years ago, where I was the rebound guy after a girl's bad breakup. We dated for 3 months, and I thought things were going really well until she told me she was getting back together with her ex because she realized she'd never actually gotten over him. The whole thing had hurt worse than I wanted to admit, and I'd spent months afterward wondering if anything between us had been real or if I was just a distraction while she processed her feelings. Telling Marinette that story made me feel exposed and vulnerable in a way I usually avoided. She listened carefully without interrupting, and when I finished, she thanked me for being honest about something that was clearly still painful. She promised she wasn't using me as a placeholder or a way to avoid dealing with her feelings about her ex. But she also admitted she was still sorting through everything and couldn't promise she had it all figured out yet. Her honesty made me trust her more, even though it would have been easier to hear that she was completely sure about us. 2 days later, Marinette's phone buzzed during lunch, and her face went pale when she looked at the screen. Her ex had sent a long email that she showed me with shaking hands. The message didn't demand anything or try to manipulate her into responding, but instead apologized for how he'd treated her throughout their relationship and said he understood if she needed space. He wrote that he'd been doing a lot of thinking about his behavior and realized he'd taken her for granted and made her feel like she had to change herself to be worth loving. The tone was surprisingly mature and made me feel guilty for assuming he would keep being a jerk forever. Marinette read through it twice, biting her lower lip, and I could tell the words were affecting her, even though she was trying not to show it. She asked what I thought she should do, and I had to push down the jealous part of me that wanted her to ignore him completely. We talked through different options for how to respond, and eventually decided she should send a brief message acknowledging she'd received his email, but reinforcing the no-contact boundary for the full week she'd originally asked for. I helped her draft something that was polite but firm, saying she appreciated his apology, but still needed time and space to think clearly. She typed it out and read it back to me 3 times, making small changes before finally hitting send without overthinking it more. The fact that she included me in the whole decision, instead of handling it privately, made me feel like a real partner rather than someone she was keeping separate from that part of her life. Her phone showed the message as delivered, and we both stared at it for a second before she locked the screen and suggested we get out of her apartment for a while. We ended up at the gym together, which was the same place her ex used to drag her to all the time during their relationship. But this time we just worked out normally without watching to see if anyone was looking at us or trying to perform being a couple. Marinette admitted halfway through that she'd always hated this gym, but pretended to love it because her ex was so into fitness and she wanted to share his interests. She said she used to fake enthusiasm about protein shakes and cardio routines, when really she found the whole gym culture kind of boring. Hearing her say that made me realize how much energy she'd spent trying to be what someone else wanted, instead of just being herself. We left without posting a single photo or checking to see if any mutual friends had spotted us there, and that felt like genuine progress. In the parking lot, Marinette said she might try finding a different gym that felt more like her own choice, rather than something connected to her past relationship. Work got unexpectedly busy on Thursday, and my manager asked me to stay late to finish a project that was due the next morning. I had to text Marinette around 4 to cancel our dinner plans, with only a few hours' notice, feeling bad about the last-minute change. I expected her to be disappointed or annoyed, but she responded right away saying it was totally fine and suggesting we reschedule for the weekend instead. The mature way she handled the cancellation without making me feel guilty surprised me in a good way. Most of the people I'd dated before would have gotten upset about canceled plans or made passive-aggressive comments about not being a priority. Marinette just sent a supportive message saying she hoped work went well and she'd see me when things calmed down. That small interaction made me feel more confident that we could handle normal relationship friction without everything becoming a big dramatic issue. Instead of sitting home alone that evening, Marinette signed up for a pottery class she told me she'd been curious about for months. She said her ex always thought pottery was boring and a waste of time, so she'd never actually tried it even though she wanted to. Around 8, she sent me a photo of her first attempt at making a bowl, and it was completely lopsided and lumpy, but her face in the picture showed genuine pride. She wrote that the class was harder than it looked, but really fun, and she'd already signed up for the full 6-week session. Watching her make choices based on her own interests rather than worrying about someone else's approval made me respect her even more. I sent back a message saying the bowl looked great and asking if she'd make me one too, which made her laugh and promise to try. The next morning, a rumor started going around through our mutual friends that I'd only gotten involved with Marinette to boost my own social status, or that I was somehow using her. Someone told someone who told someone else that the whole thing seemed fake, and I probably had ulterior motives for playing along with her ex-jealousy plan. The accusation was completely ridiculous, and it stung more than I wanted to admit that people were questioning whether I actually cared about her. Marinette called me upset after hearing the same rumor from 3 different people asking if I'd heard it too. We talked for a while about how frustrated we both were that people felt entitled to speculate about our relationship and make up stories about our motives. I realized the fake dating setup had created suspicions that wouldn't disappear overnight just because we decided to make things real. People had watched us perform a relationship for their entertainment, and now they didn't know how to stop treating us like a show they could comment on. That night, Marinette came over to my apartment, and we sat on my couch with her laptop between us, trying to figure out what to say. We spent almost an hour writing and rewriting a message that would shut down the gossip without sounding defensive or dramatic. She typed while I suggested edits, and we finally settled on something simple that said we were together and our relationship was private, and we weren't interested in discussing it with anyone. The message was only 3 sentences, but it felt powerful because we were sending it together as a team. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Marinette pulled up a list of about 6 mutual friends who seemed to be the main sources of speculation and rumors. We sent the same message to each of them individually, so it felt more personal than a mass text. Within an hour, most of them responded with some version of understanding or apology for overstepping. A couple people didn't respond at all, which was fine, because at least the message was out there. Sending that boundary as a united front made something shift inside me, and I realized this was what actual partnership felt like. 3 days later, I was grabbing lunch at the campus food court when Gita appeared out of nowhere and sat down across from me without asking. Marinette was in class, so I knew immediately this wasn't a casual encounter. Gita looked at me with an intensity that made me want to check if I had food on my face, and then she just asked straight out what my intentions were with her friend. She wanted to know if I was serious, or if I was going to hurt Marinette after everything she'd already been through. The protective energy coming off her was almost scary, but I also respected it because it meant Marinette had people who genuinely cared about her. I put down my sandwich and answered as honestly as I could that I cared about Marinette a lot, but we were taking things slow because the timing was complicated. I told Gita I wasn't trying to rush into anything or make promises I couldn't keep. She studied my face for a long moment like she was trying to detect any hint of lying. Finally, she nodded and said that was a good answer, but she'd be watching how I treated Marinette going forward. I told her that was completely fair, and I'd expect nothing less from a real friend. We sat there for another minute in slightly less tense silence before she got up and left without saying goodbye. The next afternoon, Marinette called me sounding anxious, and I could hear the stress in her voice before she even explained what was wrong. Her ex had reached out to a mutual friend, asking if he could return some of her belongings he still had at his apartment. The stuff was practical things like textbooks for classes they'd taken together and a jacket she'd left there months ago. On the surface, the request seemed totally reasonable and mature, but the timing felt strategic, like he was manufacturing an excuse to see her. Marinette said she needed those textbooks back before finals, but the thought of seeing him again made her stomach hurt. She asked if I thought she was being paranoid about his motives, and I told her honestly that I didn't know, but her feelings were valid either way. We talked through different options for how to handle the exchange. She could ask him to mail the items, but that seemed impractical for textbooks. She could send a friend to pick them up, but that felt cowardly and weird. I could hear her breathing get faster as she worked through the scenarios. I interrupted her spiral and said I'd go with her to pick up the stuff if she wanted. I made it clear I'd stay in the background and let her handle the actual conversation with her ex. My role would just be to be there for support, not to stake any claim or start drama. Marinette went quiet for a second and then said yes, she'd really appreciate that. We arranged to meet her ex the next morning in a coffee shop parking lot that was neutral territory for everyone. She texted her ex the plan, and he agreed immediately, which made me wonder if he'd been hoping for exactly this kind of interaction. That night I barely slept, because I kept imagining different ways the exchange could go wrong. I pictured her ex trying to win her back again, or me losing my cool and saying something I'd regret. By morning, I'd convinced myself to stay calm no matter what happened. We got to the parking lot 15 minutes early, and sat in my car watching other people come and go from the coffee shop. Marinette's knee bounced nervously, and she kept checking her phone, even though we'd already confirmed the time. When her ex's car pulled in, I felt my chest tighten, but I forced myself to breathe normally. He parked a few spots away and got out holding a reusable shopping bag that presumably had her stuff. I stayed by my car like I'd promised while Marinette walked over to meet him near his trunk. They stood there talking, and I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language looked stiff and formal. Her ex handed over the bag, and Marinette checked inside briefly before nodding. They exchanged a few more words, and I caught something about an upcoming exam they both had. The whole interaction took maybe 5 minutes, and there was no yelling or crying or dramatic gestures. They said goodbye in this awkward, polite way, and then her ex got back in his car and drove off. Marinette walked back to my car carrying the bag, and her face was completely blank. She got in the passenger seat and set the bag at her feet, and then just sat there staring straight ahead. I asked if she was okay, and she nodded, but didn't say anything. We sat in silence for maybe 30 seconds before her face crumpled, and she started crying. The tears came fast and hard, and her whole body shook with the force of it. I didn't try to fix it or tell her everything would be fine. I just reached into my glove compartment and handed her the travel pack of tissues I kept there. She took them without looking at me and pressed them against her face. I sat quietly and let her cry for as long as she needed. After a while, the crying slowed down to sniffles, and she wiped her eyes. She apologized for losing it, and I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She explained that seeing him made everything feel real and final in a way it hadn't before. Even though she didn't want him back, the finality of it hit her hard. We sat in that parking lot for almost an hour while she processed. Eventually, she looked at me and thanked me for not making her feel weak or stupid for having complicated emotions about her ex. That evening, we ended up at her apartment just talking on her couch, while her roommate Gita stayed in her bedroom giving us privacy. We talked for over 2 hours about all the random things that had made us actually like each other during the fake dating phase. Marinette brought up the memes we'd shared that made no sense to anyone else. I reminded her about the time we spent 40 minutes debating whether hot dogs were sandwiches. She laughed and said she'd loved how we could have completely pointless conversations about nothing important. I told her about how comfortable the silences had been when we were just sitting together, not feeling pressure to entertain each other. Marinette got quiet and then said those moments had felt more real than most of her actual relationship with her ex. She said with him, she'd always felt like she was performing or trying to be the right version of herself. With me, she'd just been herself without thinking about it. I agreed and said I'd realized we'd built something genuine even inside the artificial setup. The fake dating had given us permission to spend time together, but what developed was completely real. 2 days later, my coworker Rory invited me out for drinks after our shift ended. We went to a bar near campus and ordered beers, and Rory asked how things were going with Marinette. I told him we were good and figuring things out as we went. Rory took a long drink and then gave me this look like he was about to say something I wouldn't want to hear. He said he was happy for me, but he wanted to give me a reality check about not rushing into labels or big commitments. He reminded me that Marinette had just gotten out of a relationship only weeks ago, and she probably needed more time than I thought to really be ready for something new. His words stung a little because I'd been internally pushing for more certainty about what we were. Rory said he'd seen too many relationships crash because people jumped in too fast after a breakup. He told me to give her space to figure out her own feelings without pressure. The perspective was humbling and made me realize uncertainty was actually healthier right now than trying to lock everything down. I thanked him for being honest, even though it wasn't what I wanted to hear. The next afternoon, I was scrolling through social media during a break at work when I saw a photo that made my stomach drop. It was Marinette laughing at a table with a male classmate and a few other students. The caption said something about study group, but all I could focus on was how happy she looked talking to this guy. I felt this spike of jealousy that I had absolutely no right to feel. We weren't officially together, and even if we were, she was allowed to have male friends. I almost didn't say anything because I felt stupid for being bothered. But then I remembered we'd agreed to flag insecurities early instead of letting them build up. That night when Marinette called, I brought it up as casually as I could. I told her I'd seen the photo and felt weirdly jealous, even though I knew it was irrational. I expected her to get defensive or annoyed, but instead, she was really understanding. She explained the context that it was a group project for her psychology class, and the guy in the photo was her assigned partner. She said they'd been working together for weeks, and he had a girlfriend. Hearing the explanation made me feel less threatened, but also kind of dumb for jumping to conclusions. We ended up having a longer conversation about how we'd handle jealousy and insecurity as we moved forward. Marinette said we should both agree to speak up early when something bothered us, rather than letting it fester and turn into resentment. I agreed completely, because I'd seen how silence could poison relationships. She admitted she'd probably feel weird too if she saw me talking to other women and didn't know the context. We laughed about how normal and messy real relationships were compared to the fake perfect version we'd performed for her ex. The honesty in that conversation made me feel more secure than any reassurance could have. We weren't pretending everything was easy, or that we wouldn't have moments of doubt. We were just committing to being honest about those moments, instead of hiding them. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from someone I didn't recognize. The profile picture showed a guy I vaguely remembered seeing in photos with Marinette's ex. The message was long and felt immediately off. He said he was reaching out as a friend and wanted to warn me that Marinette always needed big romantic gestures and I'd never be able to keep up with her expectations. He went on about how her ex tried so hard to make her happy, but nothing was ever enough. The whole thing felt like interference disguised as concern. I took a screenshot without responding and sent it straight to Marinette. She called me within minutes, and her voice was sharp with annoyance. She said her ex's friend had no business messaging me, and the comment revealed way more about her ex's insecurities than anything about her actual needs. She explained that her ex used to complain to his friends about how demanding she supposedly was, when really he just didn't want to put in basic effort. Hearing her frustration made me realize this was another piece of manipulation trying to get into my head. We talked through it and agreed to block the friend on both our accounts to cut off that avenue completely. That conversation led naturally into Marinette bringing up something she'd been thinking about for a few days. She suggested we both take a full 30-day break from posting anything about our relationship on social media. No couple photos, no check-ins, no subtle references, nothing that would invite comments or speculation from other people. She said she wanted to remove all external pressure and just focus on each other without an audience watching and judging every move we made. I agreed immediately, because the idea of dating without performing for social media sounded incredibly freeing. We were sitting in her apartment, and she stuck out her hand to shake on it like we were making a formal business deal. I laughed and shook her hand, and we both felt noticeably lighter after making that pact. The 30 days would give us space to figure out what we actually were without the noise of everyone else's opinions. A few days later, we started planning a casual group hangout with some mutual friends. The idea was to let people see us acting normal together without making it a big relationship announcement or reveal. We just wanted to exist as two people who liked each other and were spending time together, without all the drama and speculation. Marinette picked a low-key restaurant with outdoor seating where we could blend into a larger group. She was nervous about the group dynamic and kept asking if people would make things weird. I reminded her that we didn't owe anyone a performance or explanation. We were just going to show up, be ourselves, and let people draw their own conclusions. She nodded, but I could tell she was still anxious about how the evening would go. The hangout itself started out fine. About 8 of us gathered at the restaurant and ordered appetizers and drinks. Conversation flowed naturally at first, covering typical college stuff like upcoming exams and weekend plans. But then one mutual friend started making pointed comments about Marinette's ex. She kept bringing him up in ways that felt designed to stir up drama for her own entertainment. She asked loudly if anyone had seen him lately, and made comments about how he must be so heartbroken. Marinette and I exchanged a quick look across the table. Without discussing it, we both smoothly changed the subject together, redirecting to a funny story about a professor we all shared. Later, when the friend tried again to bring up the ex situation, we stood up and moved to get refills from the bar, casually stepping away from her without making a scene. Walking back with our drinks, I felt proud of how we'd handled it. Our ability to work as a team without even needing to talk about it first felt like a small relationship win. Later that night, after everyone had left and Marinette and I were walking back to her apartment, I brought up something that had been bothering me. I admitted that I'd really liked being the hero who saved her in the cafe that first day. The role had felt good and important, and now I was scared that without it, I was just ordinary and boring. The confession felt embarrassing to say out loud, but I forced myself to be honest. Marinette stopped walking and turned to look at me seriously. She said she didn't need a hero or someone to rescue her. What she needed was someone who saw her as an equal and respected her ability to handle her own life. Her response hit me hard in a good way. I realized I'd been clinging to this savior identity that wasn't healthy for either of us. Being someone's equal partner was actually harder and more meaningful than being their hero. We stood there on the sidewalk for a minute while I processed that shift in perspective. That conversation opened the door for Marinette to share something deeper about herself. She told me her people-pleasing patterns had started way before her ex came into the picture. She traced it back to always trying to make her parents proud and keep her friends happy, constantly putting other people's needs ahead of her own. She said her ex had just recognized and exploited something that was already there. Now she was working on catching herself when she abandoned her own needs to please someone else. She gave specific examples like agreeing to activities she hated or changing her opinions to match whoever she was with. Hearing her talk so openly about her struggles made me feel honored that she trusted me with that level of honesty. I told her I noticed she'd been getting better at stating what she actually wanted, instead of just going along with my suggestions. She smiled and said she was trying. Building on that conversation, we decided to establish a weekly check-in routine. Every Sunday evening, we would specifically ask each other if anything was bothering us or if there were any small issues we needed to address. The idea came from an article Marinette had read about healthy communication in relationships. She pulled it up on her phone and showed me the section about creating structured space for honesty before little problems became big resentments. Even though it felt a bit formal and awkward at first, we both appreciated having a designated time to clear the air. Our first official check in that Sunday covered pretty small stuff. I mentioned feeling like we hadn't been splitting restaurant bills fairly, and Marinette brought up wanting more advance notice when I had to cancel plans. Nothing major, but practicing the format felt important. We agreed to keep doing it every week. A few days later, we were at the original cafe where her ex had broken up with her all those weeks ago. We hadn't planned to go there, but we were in the area and both wanted coffee. The moment we walked in, I spotted her ex sitting at a table near the window with one of his friends. My stomach dropped hard and fast. He looked up and saw us at exactly the same moment. There was this long, awkward pause where all 4 of us just froze. The cafe noise continued around us, but it felt like everything had stopped. Marinette grabbed my hand instinctively, and I squeezed back, both of us trying to stay calm and act normal. We ordered our drinks at the counter and found a table on the opposite side of the room. I kept my back to where her ex was sitting, but I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on both of us. I was hoping we could just drink our coffee and leave without any interaction, but a few minutes later, her ex stood up and walked over to our table. My whole body tensed up preparing for confrontation or drama, but when he started talking, his tone was calm and respectful. He apologized to both of us for any drama he'd caused over the past few weeks. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking about how he'd handled things, and he knew he'd messed up badly. There was no begging or grand romantic gesture, just a simple acknowledgement that he'd treated Marinette poorly, and he regretted it. He said he respected whatever decision she'd made, and he genuinely wished us both well. Then he went back to his friend's table without waiting for a response. Marinette and I sat there completely stunned by how mature and straightforward the interaction had been. After her ex left with his friend a few minutes later, Marinette and I just sat in silence for a full minute, processing what had just happened. Then we started talking through our reactions to make sure we were both okay. I admitted I'd been bracing for him to make a scene or try to guilt trip her. Marinette said she'd expected the same thing and was surprised by his calm approach. We agreed not to make the encounter bigger than it actually was. We weren't going to celebrate like we'd won some competition, but we also weren't going to spiral into worry about what it meant. The encounter had been uncomfortable, but we'd survived it. Her ex's respect for boundaries and his ability to apologize without strings attached was actually kind of reassuring. It felt like maybe he was genuinely moving on too. We finished our coffee and left the cafe holding hands, both feeling like we'd cleared some kind of hurdle we didn't know we needed to clear. The next morning at work, I couldn't stop smiling while restocking shelves, and Rory noticed immediately. He walked over during our break and asked if Marinette and I were official now, grinning like he already knew the answer. I was tempted to say yes just to have something clear and simple to tell him. Instead, I admitted we were taking things slow and not worrying about labels yet, which actually felt more honest than any definite answer would have been. Rory nodded approvingly and said rushing to define things is how most college relationships crash and burn before they even get started. His perspective made me feel better about the uncertainty. That Friday afternoon, Marinette texted me saying she had to cancel our weekend plans because of a family thing she completely forgot about. My stomach dropped, and my first reaction was hurt, mixed with suspicion that maybe she was having second thoughts about us. I caught myself starting to spiral into worst-case scenarios and had to consciously remind myself she'd been reliable every single other time. When we talked later that evening, I admitted the last-minute cancellation had triggered some insecurity in me. Marinette listened without getting defensive, and we discussed how we could both try to give more advance notice when schedules change. The conversation over the phone turned into a longer repair talk, where Marinette used this reflective listening thing she learned in her psychology class. She repeated back what she heard me say before responding to make sure she understood correctly. It felt kind of awkward and formal at first, but it actually worked to make me feel heard. We agreed she'd work on giving me more heads up about schedule changes, and I'd work on not immediately jumping to the worst possible explanation. A few nights later, we took a quiet walk through campus when hardly anyone else was around. Marinette reached for my hand without seeming to think about it, and we both noticed at the same time how completely natural the gesture felt. We stopped under a streetlight and just looked at each other for a long moment. The intimacy felt earned, rather than staged or performed for anyone. No one was watching us, and no one would ever know about this specific moment except the two of us, which somehow made it more meaningful than any of our fake dates had been. The next afternoon, her ex sent Marinette a message, asking if he could have one final conversation with her in person for closure. He promised he wouldn't try to change her mind about anything or cause drama. Marinette showed me the message with anxious energy radiating off her, saying she felt like she owed him that conversation after their history together. I felt fear spike through my chest, but I knew I couldn't and shouldn't try to control whether she talked to him. We spent an hour talking through the logistics of how the meeting would happen. We agreed she'd meet him during the day in a public park where other people would be around. I wouldn't be there because my presence would completely change the dynamic and make it about me instead of giving them real closure. Marinette appreciated that I trusted her to handle the situation alone and promised to text me the moment it was over. Setting up clear boundaries around the meeting actually helped me feel less anxious about it happening. The closure conversation took place the next afternoon while I tried to focus on homework and failed completely. Marinette texted me when it was done and called 20 minutes later. Her ex had told her he was genuinely sorry for taking her for granted, and he understood why she'd moved on. He didn't ask her to take him back or make any dramatic declarations, just expressed regret and wished her happiness. Marinette had told him clearly that she wasn't interested in getting back together, and she was moving forward with her life. When she called me right after, she sounded emotionally exhausted but relieved the conversation was finally done. She specifically thanked me for not inserting myself into the situation or demanding to be there, saying my trust had meant everything to her. The fact that she came back to me after that conversation feeling more certain about us made me feel secure in a way I hadn't felt before. That evening, we met up and had the actual "what are we" conversation we'd been avoiding. We decided we were exclusively dating and moving at our own pace without broadcasting it publicly or making a big announcement. We weren't ready for heavy relationship labels or big milestones, but we were committed to seeing where this could go. The decision felt right because it was based on what we actually wanted rather than what we were trying to prove to anyone else watching. Over the next few days, we both did the practical work of creating final distance from her ex. Marinette blocked him on social media, removed old photos from her phone, and deleted his contact information except for true emergencies. The actions weren't dramatic or emotional, just closing doors that didn't need to stay open anymore. She told me each small step made her feel lighter and more focused on moving forward rather than looking back. Geeta caught Marinette in the apartment hallway a few days later and pulled her aside for a private conversation. I was picking Marinette up for our usual Thursday evening walk when Geeta stopped us both with a serious expression on her face. She looked at me directly and said she'd been watching how I handled everything over the past few weeks. Geeta admitted she was skeptical at first because the whole fake dating thing seemed messy and potentially hurtful. But she respected that I hadn't rushed Marinette into anything or made the relationship all about me. She told Marinette right in front of me that she was warming up to the idea of us together. Getting Geeta's approval felt more significant than I expected because I knew how much Marinette valued her roommate's opinion. Marinette's face lit up with relief, and she squeezed my hand. The three of us stood there awkwardly for a moment before Geeta smiled and went back into the apartment. Marinette and I walked to the park in comfortable silence, both processing what just happened. Over the next couple weeks, Marinette and I started building small routines that felt sustainable rather than exciting. Every Sunday morning, we met at the quiet cafe across town, the one her ex never knew about. We'd order the same drinks and sit at the same corner table by the plants. During the week, we took evening walks through the park, where we'd had our first honest conversation about real feelings. The path became familiar, and we started recognizing other regular walkers. Marinette created a shared music playlist that we both added songs to throughout the week. Sometimes I'd hear a song she added and text her about it immediately. These rituals didn't feel performative or staged like our fake dates had. They just felt real and easy. I realized somewhere during our third Sunday morning coffee that I was building an actual relationship rather than chasing a feeling or trying to prove something. The routines grounded us in something steady instead of dramatic. One evening during our walk, Marinette brought up money in a way that made her visibly uncomfortable. She'd been noticing that I picked up most of our bills for coffee, meals, and activities. Marinette said the imbalance bothered her because she didn't want me to feel like I had to pay for everything or for her to feel like she owed me. I appreciated her honesty even though talking about money felt awkward. We sat on a park bench and worked out a practical plan to alternate paying or split things more evenly going forward. The discussion actually made me feel closer to her rather than weird about it. Talking about money without tension or resentment felt like a sign we were building a real partnership. Marinette seemed relieved after we figured out the plan. We both agreed that being able to discuss practical stuff like expenses meant we were treating this like a real relationship with real considerations. The following week, Marinette invited me to meet a few of her friends at a casual lunch spot near campus. I could tell she was nervous about the meeting because she kept checking her phone and adjusting her hair. 3 of her friends showed up, and they were friendly, but clearly protective of Marinette. They asked subtle questions about my major, my plans after graduation, and how Marinette and I met. I understood they were looking out for her after everything with her ex. I tried to be genuine and answer honestly, rather than trying too hard to impress them. By the end of lunch, the atmosphere relaxed considerably. One friend even joked that I was way better than the last guy, which made Marinette kick her under the table. Walking back to campus afterward, Marinette thanked me for being patient with her friend's questioning. She said it meant a lot that I understood why they were protective. A few days later, Marinette's phone buzzed during our Sunday coffee, and her face went pale when she looked at the screen. Her ex had sent a message to both of us, saying he appreciated the closure conversation from weeks ago. The message was brief and respectful, saying he wouldn't be reaching out again and wished us both well. There was no manipulation or hidden agenda in his words. Marinette showed me her phone with shaky hands, and we read the message together twice. I felt the last thread of tension from that entire situation finally release from my shoulders. Marinette replied with a simple acknowledgement, and then blocked his number completely. We sat there for a moment, letting the finality sink in. That chapter was actually closed now. The next afternoon, Marinette suggested we go back to the original cafe where her ex had broken up with her and where I'd first pretended to be her boyfriend. I was surprised by the suggestion, but she said she wanted to reclaim that space with better memories. We walked in together and deliberately chose a different table by the window instead of where the breakup happened. The cafe felt completely different sitting in the bright sunlight rather than in the middle of the room. We spent 2 hours there just talking and laughing like it was any other cafe. Marinette ordered a different drink than she used to get with her ex. By the time we left, the symbolic return felt empowering rather than painful. She said the cafe didn't hold the same weight anymore. During our weekly check-in that Friday evening, we asked each other a question we'd been avoiding. Marinette wanted to know if anything still felt pretend or performative about our relationship. I admitted I sometimes worried she'd get bored now that there was no drama or excitement. Marinette confessed she worried I'd realize I liked the excitement of the fake dating more than I actually liked her as a person. Voicing these fears out loud somehow made them feel smaller and more manageable. We both laughed at how similar our insecurities were. I told her I genuinely enjoyed the quiet routine we'd built together. She said she felt more secure in our relationship than she ever had with her ex. The honest conversation cleared the air between us. We decided right then to set a near-term boundary about our relationship. Neither of us would make any big declarations or public relationship posts for at least another month. We wanted to keep building our foundation privately without external pressure or validation. The restraint felt mature rather than restrictive, like we were protecting something valuable. Both of us felt secure enough in what we were building that we didn't need to broadcast it to everyone. Marinette deleted the Instagram app from her phone entirely for a while. I stopped checking who viewed my stories. The next few weeks unfolded in a series of small, normal moments that made our relationship feel real and sustainable. We went grocery shopping together and argued playfully about which brand of pasta to buy. We studied side by side in the library in comfortable silence, occasionally sliding snacks across the table to each other. We developed inside jokes that no one else would understand, usually about random things we noticed during our walks. When Marinette had a bad day with a difficult professor, I didn't try to fix everything or offer solutions. I just listened and brought her favorite takeout. When I stressed about an upcoming exam, she helped me make flashcards without making me feel stupid for being anxious. The ordinariness of these moments was exactly what made everything feel real. I caught myself feeling genuinely happy rather than anxiously waiting for something to go wrong. There was no performance or strategy, just two people choosing to spend time together. 6 weeks after that moment in the park, where her ex had shown up with flowers, Marinette and I were sitting on her apartment couch after dinner. Gita was out for the evening, so we had the place to ourselves. Marinette turned to me with a thoughtful expression and said this was the healthiest relationship she'd ever had. She explained that we kept choosing each other deliberately, rather than just falling into comfortable patterns or staying together out of habit. I agreed completely, and added that the work of building something real was harder than performing a fake relationship, but infinitely more worthwhile. We both acknowledged that this was still new and would require ongoing effort and communication, but we were committed to showing up for each other honestly, even when it was uncomfortable or required difficult conversations. That quiet commitment felt like the happiest ending I could ask for, not because everything was perfect, but because we were both willing to keep trying. And that's where we'll wrap things up for now. Thanks for spending this little moment with me. It's honestly what makes sharing these stories special. I hope it left you feeling a little warmer inside. Subscribe if you want to come along for the next one.